Thanks everybody for coming today. I'm State Representative Seth Grove, person who kind of thought of getting a discussion. I know we normally call them round table, and every round table I've been to has never ever had a round table. So we'll call this the U-table discussion on Act 89 transportation funding, which was critically needed in Pennsylvania. As it was passed last year, money is starting to flow in, and we're seeing projects moving forward. I thought it would be a good opportunity to get stakeholders together and discuss the overall impact of this between local government leaders, business leaders, and obviously mass transit, as well as those who are looking at projects and have the fun time of spending the money that we haven't had in quite a while to actually move projects forward. So I appreciate everybody coming out. I think we'll just start with introductions of everybody here. And when you speak, make sure you speak into the microphones. We are having this taped for future reference. No blackmail, but future reference moving forward. So just make sure you use the mic. So thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Secretary of Transportation Barry Shoke.
Hello, Ron Miller, State Rep, 93rd District.
Kevin Schreiber, State Rep, 95th District.
Good afternoon, Mike Kaiser. I'm the District Executive at District 80.
Fred Thompson with Kinsley Construction, Highway and Bridge Division Coordinator.
David Garabedian, Zoning Officer for Dallastown Borough.
Scott Sternberger, Vice President for Transportation with Buchard Horn.
Want to go around the
Representative Saylor's office. Wendy Leahy, Representative Seth Grove's office.
Will Clark, York County Planning Commission. Rich Farr with Rapid Transit.
Matt Mangus, Dover Township Supervisor.
Felicia Dow, Director of the York County Planning Commission, who also administers the York Area Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Rich Wagman with GANFC Wagman.
John Kleindens with C.S. Davidson Incorporated.
Bob Riley with Congressman Scott Perry.
Thanks. I appreciate everybody coming out and taking time this afternoon to discuss this important issue and have further discussions on how we can better our transportation infrastructure moving forward. So, Mr. Secretary, I thought I'd throw it over to you as you were a leader in getting this done, working tirelessly with the General Assembly and stakeholders across the Commonwealth to move transportation funding, infrastructure funding in this state forward. So I was wondering if you could start off with maybe an overview of where we were and how Act 89 has led to greater investment in our infrastructure moving forward.
Certainly, Representative. First of all, I want to thank this delegation here and really the entire General Assembly. When Representative Grove said about a tireless dialogue, I think it was a very meaningful dialogue with the legislature that had a good outcome. We discussed and kicked and probed a lot of different things, and these two gentlemen sitting to my right and left were involved in a lot of those discussions about a lot of different ideas. And what emerged from that dialogue was Act 89, which is a comprehensive transportation solution. Rich served, first of all, thanks for hosting us, Rich. Rich served on our Transportation Funding Advisory Commission for Governor Corbett, and when the governor and I discussed me joining him as a cabinet member, we talked about the need to deal with this. And the question was, it had been batted around for so many years, what's the right way to deal with it? And the Funding Commission came out with a series of recommendations. Really, Act 89 ended up mirroring a lot of the recommendations of the Funding Commission. And throughout that dialogue, though, members of both parties in both chambers were highly interested in this. And I think that was the result of what Representative Grove called maybe a tiring or tireless effort of that dialogue. But the reality was there was a lot of interest in coming up with a compromise solution. And it involved a lot of things. It involved new revenue. It involved modernization of us at the department and the way we work with other agencies. It involved the creation of a multimodal fund that I'll talk about more today that really is a first time of its kind that gives dedicated funding to other modes. It involved a updated prevailing wage law that had not been touched since it was created back in the 1960s. And I'll say Ron brought that up to me early on in the dialogue, as did others. But it was something that I think a lot of things went into this bill that I hope our federal colleagues are paying attention to as to how we got to this compromise. It was a combination of streamlining, showing efficiency, showing investment, and being certain that there was an outcome of that investment that was going to be both prudent use of the funds, both in mass transportation, as well as our own highway and bridge program and local governments, a lot of new programs and concepts, and modernization of some of the regulations that apply, including the prevailing wage. So the end result was a bill that's going to infuse by year 5 $2.3 to $2.4 billion of additional revenue into the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's transportation in every way we move a person or product through this Commonwealth. And in terms of our economic competitiveness, this is a huge message to the business community that we're committed in Pennsylvania to investing in our infrastructure. Whether our people that are employed by companies are riding mass transit, whether they're shipping products by rail, through ports, through highways, and any other mode, it enables us at the Department of Transportation to do our job, which is to support the lifestyle and economy of Pennsylvania and ensure that we're competitive with other states. And I want to thank the delegation down here for their dialogue and support for the bill. And the outcome, I think, you're starting to see today. If, like me, you drive around this Commonwealth a lot, you're seeing a lot of orange cones and orange barrels, and to me, that's a welcome relief to see that. This year alone, had Act 89 not been passed, we would have dropped to a low that we had not seen for decades of $1.5 billion of statewide investment in highways and bridges at PennDOT. Instead of dropping to $1.5 billion, and instead of Mike Kaiser and I going around District 8 and me going around the state saying, here's what we're not going to do, and Felicia trying to squeeze dollars into the huge amount of projects, instead we're able to have a much more welcome message of here's what we are going to do. And this year, we're going to invest about $2.3 billion statewide. That's $800 million over what we would have done. By year 5, we'll probably be around $2.6 billion statewide. That's $1.1 billion more every year into the Commonwealth's Highway and Bridge Program. For public transportation, aging fleets, inefficient fleets, because of the age of the fleets, Rich is nodding his head, we're going to inject by year 5 $500 million a year more into our public transportation systems. Local government's going to see a 60% increase in liquid fuels revenue, and about $250 million by year 5. The multimodal fund, a first-time ever fund that provides dedicated funding for pedestrian and bicycle facilities, for ports, for aviation, and for railroads, will provide $140 million by year 5. In addition, it provides a lot of flexibility with money for local roads, beginning with $35 million next year, where we can invest with local governments as a partner on roads that will alleviate congestion on state routes. And that's something we never do in the past, using liquid fuels money. We know that when local governments own 77,000 miles of road and we own 40,000 miles of road, that clearly the two systems have to be productive together. And this gives us an opportunity to invest. And it gives us an opportunity to start working on long delayed but clearly necessary projects for other pedestrian and bicycle facilities through the Commonwealth, streetscapes, things that are important to economic vitality and health to local areas, to rejuvenate our communities and boroughs and towns. And clearly through the first year where we got $240 million of requests for $20 million of money, there is a huge backlog in need and desired improvements in our local road and bridge system, pedestrian bicycle facilities, and what I'll call the non-traditional highway modes in Pennsylvania and public transportation modes. So this year alone, as I said, we're going to go out to about $2.3 billion. In addition to the $2.3 billion, in the end of October, we're going to select the entity for our P3 program, for our Rapid Bridge program, where we're going to replace 560 structurally deficient bridges, full replacements, single and two-span bridges statewide, over a 3.5-year period, instead of 12 to 15 years. And we expect to see a substantial cost reduction in the cost per bridge. Also, for every motorist, a substantial reduction in the time that it takes us to get in and get out, because of prefabricating and standardizing many elements of these bridges because of the standardization of the type and size around the Commonwealth. You can take your pick of where that price might come in. We have our own side bets going on within the department, but somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion, so just to put a range on so that I can't be wrong, somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion is where that's going to come in. If you add that to $2.3 billion, we're going to put over $3 billion worth of work out this year. $3 billion instead of $1.5 billion. The impact over the next several years of what I just described to the Commonwealth's infrastructure in all shapes and fashions, be it a public transportation system or a highway and bridge, state-owned or local-owned, community projects, the impact is going to be staggering. Job creation and retention in the underemployed construction field is a thing of the past because of Act 89. In terms of the quality of our infrastructure, the eventual reduction in the number of weight-restricted bridges, posted and closed bridges, is going to be huge. The smoothness and safety of our highways is going to be significant. And then frankly, a couple of new programs that we're going to come out with later this year on a Green Light Go program, which I'll be soon announcing, where we're partnering with local government. In Act 89, there's $40 million by year 5 dedicated to investments in signals. And that $40 million is for local governments to apply for their share of the cost of upgrading signals. Any traffic engineer in the Commonwealth, and probably any transportation planner, will tell you the most impactful thing we can do is upgrade signals to process vehicles more efficiently. And we're going to have a concerted effort, both with that program and our own program, to upgrade our traffic signals, to put new equipment in, to tie them into our operation centers, and improve the efficiency of the existing network by as much as 30% by using the updated traffic signal equipment that's out there. We're also going to be announcing the rollout of our local bridge bundling opportunities. Local government owns a lot of structurally deficient bridges as well. We had a very successful pilot in 3 counties in the Commonwealth of bundling bridges of similar size and type. And in those projects, we were able to tell local governments that instead of a 5, 10, 20% match, that the savings by doing it this method of bundling enabled us to pick up 100% of the share and have zero cost for local government if your bridge fit into a bundle. The reason we're able to do that for the state taxpayers is not because we wanted to relieve local government of the burden, but by us taking over the management of it and working with local governments, 100% of doing it this method was less than 80% of the cost doing it individually. So we're saving state dollars, we're saving local dollars. Rich is very involved in looking at a similar effort of consolidation of transit agencies. We've seen some pilots that were encouraging these kinds of studies. This can reduce the overhead costs, if you will, or operating costs of the transit agencies, which enables either a lowering of a local share or providing more service with the same dollars. So I think you can see a constant thread here of what we're trying to achieve, and that is, yes, we're putting more money into the program. Yes, we're investing more. Yes, you are investing more, each one of us, because we're asking you to, as part of Act 89, to invest in the system you use. But we're doing so in a method of efficiency that's never been approached in the past by the type of things I'm talking about. And I think that's our role at PennDOT, frankly, is we are the lead transportation agency, and we should offer that assistance to municipalities, offer the bulk buying power that we can offer the management experience we can to reduce costs for all levels of government. Because frankly, the drivers out there have no idea whether they're driving on a state or local road. Unless they're on an interstate, or one of our primary routes, I would guarantee you they don't know, and they shouldn't know. And that seamlessness of the system is what we're after. So to be honest, Representative Grove, at a high level, this is a huge opportunity for the Commonwealth. It keeps us on a competitive advantage with our neighboring states that have enacted similar legislation in Maryland and Virginia. Delaware is going through a similar process that we went through. I'm glad I'll say for all of us that we're not in the middle of that again. We'll see how theirs comes out. But this is a basic responsibility and role of government, is to fund infrastructure. It's about public safety. It's about economic competitiveness. Our legislature stepped up. Governor Corbett pushed it for a reason. From day one, when he and I had a discussion about this in my interview, he committed to me that this was something that, from his standpoint, was a pure and simple public safety issue, and economic competitiveness and something we had to deal with. And our legislature, I can tell you from being asked to speak around the country, most recently in Washington, D.C. last week, this is being viewed nationally as a significant, maybe the most significant transportation bill, certainly in the history of this Commonwealth, and maybe nationally, because other states are asking what we did, how we accomplished it, and how we intend to use the money, both in the P3 world and in our traditional delivery modes. So Congress is watching. The U.S. Secretary had me down last week to talk to him about what we did, how we did it, and how we're using it. So we're getting a lot of attention for what was accomplished in Act 89, rightfully so, and I appreciate the work with your local delegation and the dialogue we had. Mike Kaiser can talk about the local projects in more detail than I can, but as could Felicia. But I can tell you that from Mike's standpoint, from Felicia's standpoint, Rich's standpoint, it's a lot more pleasant picture looking forward and what we're going to be doing than it would have been without Act 89. And for a change, we're talking about widening Interstate 83 rather than not rebuilding it. We're talking about widening the Capitol Beltway rather than an inability to rebuild it. We're talking about adding lanes, adding capacity, improving the system, reducing the congestion for the users. And at a cost by year 5, worst case of $250 a week for the average user, it's a bargain in terms of what you're going to see in improved roadway surfaces, congestion relief, and relief to the posted and weight-restricted bridge problem that we had. Same thing with public transportation. I'm sure Rich could tell you about the same. For local governments, the same deal. It's an opportunity to do our jobs, do it well, and this funding package, I think, is going to go a long way, and probably for decades will be looked at as a significant piece of legislation that was enacted that's going to have a big effect in a positive way on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for a great overview of this whole process. I think maybe the most significant thing that you said early on was the fact that, we are seeing a lot of construction out there right now, and it's great, but the fact that we were facing a cutback on the construction because the dollars just weren't going to be there to spend at the levels that we were used to. That's one of the things I think the public doesn't really understand at times is what crisis we were facing. So with that said, I'm just going to pass it on and let others talk because of the fact I think there's a lot of people that have information to share with us that will be quite useful. But Representative Schreiber?
Sure. I think I just thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think I echo Representative Grove and Representative Miller. This was probably the biggest bill that, aside from the budget, that I had worked on in my first year with the legislature, and very proud to support it. I remember having that conversation thinking I screamed for infrastructure investment in city government for 8 years and would really be hypocritical if I didn't vote for it. But and I think, along the lines of everything you said, I couldn't agree more. And I think from a local perspective, obviously being able to invest more in our mass transit and, representing the 95th district, which is primarily, the majority of it is York City. We've had a great relationship from the city of York with PennDOT and federal. In fact, some of the programs that we've used, going back to Congressman Platts, he had helped on some brownfield streetscaping money. So I think it achieved what we need to do, which is finally invest in our infrastructure and do it on a comprehensive annual basis and not hodgepodge it and piecemeal it together. And I think I would say I wish we could even go further too to some degree. I know this was probably as far as we could get. But needless to say, it will achieve what we need to, which is investing in our infrastructure and the economic competitiveness and managing the rural, suburban, and urban needs. And from a city perspective or an urbanized perspective, I'm very appreciative not only of the mass transit inclusion, but also the increase in liquid fuels allocation for municipalities over time. We were just having a conversation earlier that most of that increase is all going to fix up from last year's snow havoc and salt consumption, but that's a very big deal. In the city of York, our county bridges, I've spent several years working with Will and Felicia on trying to figure out ways to cobble things together. So, and even, and this is the challenge that municipalities have is, over the course of time, we saw our reductions in community development block grant dollars, and we're forced to rip the Band-Aid off and grant out less of those dollars to some of the good organizations and projects in town and put it into infrastructure because it's just the funding was not there. So I greatly appreciate your work to get this thing through, and of course the work of Representative Miller and Grove. And obviously I'm looking forward to how it shakes out in York County and how it's going to improve the system. And I know from something that Representative Miller and I have talked about often and is the looming issue too is stormwater as well. And one of the things with respect to streetscaping and multimodal, we just had a ribbon cutting on Jackson Street by York College the other day, and C.S. Davidson had done some good engineering to include more stormwater retention in the new sidewalks that we had built there. So I think that's something that we should probably consider going forward as we invest in our streetscaping and multimodal is also the stormwater management and mitigation. So, but with that, and thank you very much for the signal timing, I think that will be incredible. So. Thank you.
I think I'm more excited about that than anything else. Before we go down into driving down to York County and the effect, I know we have some individuals in this room who directly deal with the construction industry. I'd love to hear from John, Rich, friends at Kinsley, Bucor, Horn, and Rich Farr about what it was like before Act 89. The horror stories of what you saw on a day-to-day basis within the construction field. How bad were our roads and bridges? And moving forward, how has it changed over the past few months moving forward with paving and reconstruction bridge projects? So, maybe John, if you can start.
I can start just with the municipal viewpoint. I mean, before Act 89, all of our, and we represent, I think, 22 clients in York County, municipal clients. Everyone was on cutbacks and trying to dig deeper and deeper into their general fund to actually do paving. Since Act 89, we've been able to move some of that money back into liquid fuels, open up general fund, take some of the pressure off of the property tax. So that's been a huge improvement. One of my comments today was going to be that most of our clients haven't done a lot more construction work this year in the first year. It's very early yet because of the winter we had last year, and really the money was, as Representative Schreiber said, it was a welcome infusion to pay them back for last winter. And several of our clients have an asset management program that we've put together where we look out 5 years. Well, as a result of Act 89 and additional funding, we'll be able to advance up some of the projects that were on that. So I see that happening next year in the 2015 program. So that's a huge improvement we've seen. On the county level, I'll talk about it, and then Felicia can talk about it too, but I'm also the York County engineer, and I'm strongly encouraging the county commissioners to pursue the $5 registration fee, which is contained in the act. I believe it's critical to the 94 bridges we have. And so it's not directly related to construction, but it will be in the future. So it's early on in the game, but I see tremendous impacts. Rich?
From a contractor's view, the last several years have really been hard on us, and we've been focused pretty much in the other states. We now have 3 offices in Virginia. We're over in New Jersey. Have always done a lot of work in Maryland, Delaware. Have some work down there. We're really encouraged to see that Pennsylvania now has adequate funding and to rebuild our workforce here in Pennsylvania, which had been pretty well decimated with the lack of work locally here. So we're in a rebuild process here. So far, most of the work that's come out on one end of the spectrum, it's been mostly small jobs, and we're geared more towards the larger ones. On the larger end, we are pursuing the Bundle Bridge project in a joint venture with a couple of other firms. So looking with great anticipation of what's going to happen in October here. But very optimistic about the future.
Fred Thompson with Kinsley Construction. I would certainly echo what you're saying as well, as a contractor and an employer in the region. Our absent of Act 89, our long-term planning was looking more south, more towards Maryland and areas where we have other resources, because they did have the funding and they had projects coming out, and unfortunately, you have to go where the work is. We're very pleased to see this thing get passed. It's definitely made a change in our business model and what we're looking to do moving forward, and we're excited about the opportunities as well. I know our perspective has been that the DOT has been forced to work on system preservation and keep things moving and keep everybody driving out there, but we're also looking forward to more of the capacity adding and the larger projects where you can really ramp up your workforce and know that long term, it's going to be there, and year after year there's going to be jobs and opportunities.
Okay. From the Buchard Horn standpoint, the last 7 years were tough. I'd say we were down 40% staff-wise over that time period, which a lot of firms were. That's kind of a number that we're hearing. Certainly, the passage of this legislation is there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think it was only 2 weeks after it passed, we were awarded a contract in PennDOT District 5, which was what they call Decade of Investment, which were contracts based on this law passing. But it happened that fast that we saw results from the passage of this. And, like the other folks are saying, the future's bright. We're we're in a hiring mode. And that's challenging too, because a lot of folks left. They either left the state, they went working for shale gas companies. So, it's going to be a challenge building our staff back up, but I'm sure with this much work, we'll be successful.
One other point I'd like to make is everything really looks great right now. It's just we have this one cloud down in Washington hanging over us. And they've kicked the can down the road one more time, although there seems to be a greater awareness, and they seem committed to coming up with a long-term solution. But absent that, we're going to be worse off than we were before the act, because as I understand it, a lot of the money that's raised by the states typically can be used for different things, whereas the federal money is pretty well restricted, that it's got to go into construction, and that's really where the rubber meets the road. You know, we're very dependent upon our federal, I guess less dependent on our federal money now, but it's a huge concern, and you know, anything we can do to exert more pressure on our representatives and senators in D.C. Has just got to be our first priority at this point, because that's, like I say, the one big black cloud hanging out there. And the short term, you know, nobody can do any long-term planning with these short-term fixes that they keep coming up with down there. And I think they finally realized that, you know, every time they go back to the well to do one of these, it's costing about, what, $15 billion a year. And the general fund can't sustain that. And it's very unpredictable funding, so you can't do long-term planning.
One of the other hats that I wear here today is as chair of the York County Economic Alliance. And first of all, we were strong supporters of what ended up being Act 89, and we continue to be, but we're also continued supporters of doing something at the federal level. And I can tell you that as of yesterday, we did an advocacy trip to Washington and met with both Senators Toomey and Casey, who both are on board to do a federal bill. They recognize the need for a long term, and I'll rely on Bob to beef it up, but it's not going to happen in the short term. They recognize that it has to be done. They recognize the impact it has on us, even with our Act 89. It's not going to happen in the short term.
Rich, thank you, one, for hosting, and thank you for supplying a bus to take a little tour of projects after we have our discussion here. Kind of same kind of question. What were you facing as executive director of our mass transit system here in New York prior to Act 89, and what are we looking at now afterwards?
Well, first of all, we provide transportation to almost 1.2 million work trips, over 2 million trips, but of those, more than 1 million trips are for people to get to work. And prior to Act 89, they were endangered of almost elimination. 64% of our fleet was beyond its estimated useful life. Not a little bit past the estimated useful life, a lot. We had buses that had over 990,000 miles on them running every day on the road. It's a safety issue when you have vehicles that are that old, and it becomes a huge challenge. So Act 89 has put us in a position where we can actually have, for the first time in 6 years, a capital plan. I would work with Felicia and Will to prepare the tip, and I said, you know, this isn't a plan, it's a wish list, because there's no funding source to back it up, none. Here's my list of needs. We had to put it all under local because there's no state or federal funds that can meet that need. Huge issue. I think the other really exciting part of Act 89 for us is that it gives us the resources to complete the facility project that we desperately need. For those of you who come here today, parking is at a premium. We have to reserve spots or you wouldn't even get in here. Employees back their bus out and pull their car in. This facility holds 65 buses. We have 87 buses. It's a problem. And we're going to be able to utilize compressed natural gas in the new facility. And the designs are here on the wall. We're well underway. We should be releasing the bids in December to move forward. And the ability to have the extra needed capital funds up front to invest in compressed natural gas is probably going to save us about $300,000 a year in operating. But we would never be able to achieve that if we didn't have those extra funds because of the needs for making the facility compliant and buying the buses. They cost about $30,000 more, but in the long run, the return on the investment is just a few years, and then we begin saving money moving forward. So Act 89 really has secured public transportation in the Commonwealth moving forward in a way that it was very dire prior to that. So we're excited about what we're going to be able to deliver to the community.
Great. I know we have some local township and borough leaders in here. If you can kind of go over what you've seen in your budgets with influx of liquid fuels. I know John mentioned alleviation of property tax burdens, which I just love. I think it should be a headline everywhere across this Commonwealth for obvious reasons. But what have you seen with budgeting, with that influx of money? Were you able to do more projects and so forth? And if anybody's utilized the threshold and prevailing wage that went up from $25,000 to $100,000?
Mr. Secretary, I'm from Dover Township here in York County, which is, I would say, primarily a rural township. We have geographically probably a third of our township that is pretty densely populated, and the other 2/3 is pretty sparse in population. Up until the Act 89, we have been able to repave less than half of the distance of road that we need to repave each year just to keep up with a schedule of keeping the roads in place. The first year we have not seen much of an increase in that, but we see that gap closing to the point where we can at least keep up with what we need to do. So we are appreciative for the increased liquid fuels money and looking forward to seeing that increase maximized. Unfortunately, we have not been able to take much advantage of the change to prevailing wage because of the length of the projects that we're doing. They simply don't come in under $100,000. Anecdotally, I've talked to the mayor of Dover Borough, which is a smaller borough that's inside of our township, and they have been able to see some savings with that. But for Dover Township, we've seen really none to this point, just because of the size of the projects we do.
That's something I think that, again, as you mentioned, as your program builds, you'll have more of a variety. And I've heard similar things from other municipalities, but when this prevailing wage law was changed, we looked at the universe of what could be done and what will be done and saw the percentage that could be affected. And clearly, it's at the local level. It's not, I think we had 13 projects at the state level. It was under 100,000, so it's not a state level issue. But I think as this 5-year uncapping of the oil company franchise tax occurs and the revenue builds, your program, as you suggest, will become more diverse, and you'll have different size projects. So there will be projects for which I'm sure you and other municipalities will see the effects of that prevailing wage. It won't be in every project. It wasn't intended to be in every project.
And I'm also very open to anyone who has ideas as to how we can maximize the use of that prevailing wage raise of the cap there. So
one thing you might want to consider, I don't know if you have, but the PIB, the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Bank loans, I, like everyone else, opposed to borrowing unless you got the dedicated revenue to pay it back. The PIB loans exist at almost a zero. I mean, it's almost a no-interest loan from us at PennDOT. They can be repaid with liquid fuels funds. So, the comments earlier about the program ramping up, we actually we asked the legislature, and they gave us $500 million of bonding authority where we didn't have to go back to them and ask for it. And the reason was they were encouraging me, and we wanted to get as much out on the street as quickly as possible. That revenue is building over a 5-year period. We actually bonded this year for $150 million of paving work because of last winter, trying to catch up from what happened last winter and also get things in better shape before next winter. We borrowed $150 million against those future revenues to sort of kickstart our own program to accelerate our catch-up on the years of underinvestment. So for local municipalities, I'd encourage you to look at the PIB loan as an option if you so desire, to accelerate your program delivery. Because, again, you've got the revenue coming in, growing in every year as part of Act 89, and it's an opportunity, if you so desire, to move your program more rapidly and take advantage of, obviously there's inflation in materials, inflation in costs every year. If you can get ahead of that curve a little bit, it might be a worthwhile thing, especially at these incredibly low interest rates that are offered through the PIB loans.
Thank you.
I'm with Dallastown Borough. I'm just a zoning officer, fairly new to this, but speaking with our manager and looking over the projects that we did, basically from this year, liquid fuels, looking at $98,000. We did 4 street projects. She has a schedule, just like you said, each year we have what we want to accomplish. But basically, raising that to the $100,000 threshold, we're able to bid on our projects, and we also bid joint with Yo Borough, which is right next to us. We're able to stay under that 100,000, and with the more quantity, it's less of a cost for us when we can bid on all 4 projects. If it was still at that 25,000, we'd have to bid individually, then making it more costly for us, and then also, probably having to hit that prevailing wage. So that raise, I think the raise with liquid fuels, she told me was maybe $5,700. Not too much, but since we only use so much, it carries over from year to year. My manager's good, Connie Stokes. With general fund, she usually only uses that with street projects for paying the engineer or for our in-house labor, our maintenance department. But through liquid fuels, she's able to pay for the labor, the equipment, and the materials. So, really, going from that 25,000 to 100,000 benefits us only because we're smaller and we're able to bid on all projects and keep it under that threshold. So.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Dave. It's interesting. As we looked at this, we also talked to York Township. They shared very similar to Dover Township because of the length of the projects, the size of them. $100,000 really didn't benefit them. It's going to be a lot of the smaller project type things. It's why I needed that $500,000, Mr. Secretary, but we couldn't get it and get the bill passed. So, but it is having an impact. We just need to do more.
I add one thing to that. In looking at all 21 of our municipal clients, it's fairly common. It applies more to the boroughs where they have smaller projects, but the townships, either because they're in programs that are larger trying to play catch-up, they're over $100,000 anyway, or they've matched their liquid fuels money with other funding sources which make it. So in the larger municipalities, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I applaud you for it, and you know my feelings on the raising the prevailing wage threshold.
As far as we can move it.
And we appreciate every little piece you can
even that movement
move
was not
it.
easy, but
And I wanted to give Representative Grove a boost, an actual real case savings and moving money from the general fund. Windsor Township had given me some information about line painting, for instance. Line painting this year, because of the additional liquid fuels money, they were able to pay the line painting out of the additional liquid fuels, which then prevented it from being spent out of the general fund. So there's a real life savings.
So we got a background on what happened. So I'm going to float over to Felicia, who has managed projects in York County for 1 or 2 years. Some history there. But as we were moving forward, I know we've had many conversations about this at the Transportation Coalition meetings. How bad was it in York specifically with program maintenance? I remember one of my local supervisors was telling me, unfortunately, we're going to have to tar and chip Admire Road. I know for years PennDOT has always asked locals to not tar and chip, to use asphalt, and it came to the point where for cost savings, just to keep up with maintenance, they were tar and chipping. So what were you seeing prior, and what are we looking at after Act 89?
Well, just the basics that we were dealing with, we're on the side of the process that a lot of people don't see. We do a lot of data gathering, we look at trends, we identify problems, we do the plans, and the final culmination of a good plan is that you have a slate of projects that you want to program for funding. And for years, I would say the prior 6 years or so, we had not been able to program any new projects because the financial capacity just wasn't there. So we were to the point where we were actually saying, we're not even going to apply for any new innovative planning funds because there's no money there to do any of the projects. So we were coming to a standstill on actually doing any new plans, identifying any new problem areas, because we couldn't get past the current list of issues that we were dealing with. The finances just weren't there. Once Act 89 came into place, there were a number of things that became available to us. Number one, as the Secretary knows, all of a sudden there's the ability to maximize the leveraging against the limited federal funding that there is, but now you can maximize that leveraging of the federal funding. But the other thing is there's a number of projects that we can do just totally funded with state money. So you can kind of bypass a lot of the federal requirements that add cost to a project. So the ability to program bridges with 100% state funding means they get done a lot more quickly. It's a much more efficient way to get projects done and on the ground and get the infrastructure back into working condition. So that's one of the other things. And finally, I know John mentioned it, and I would echo that, giving us a tool to raise money locally with the $5 registration fee is something that, even though we are getting an increase in liquid fuels, there's more bridge needs out there that can possibly ever be financed, even if you have a whole nother new Act 89. So the fact that we can do some fundraising locally to augment our bridge budget is the other thing. So I would say between the leveraging and the additional ability to do projects that are 100% state funded, giving us a tool to raise money locally has really given us some new life in actually getting projects and our plans done and on the ground.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind. And I did want to let you know, Seth, too, that Jim Gross couldn't be here today, our Public Works Director from the city. He did want to. He I think, has the day off. But for most of you that know Jim Gross, he's not the most excitable individual. But he actually smiled when this bill passed. So that was a huge accomplishment. That says a lot. But I had a question for a couple of the folks, primarily in the construction industry, that are doing a lot of work in some of the other states. And Mr. Wagman, you had mentioned, you guys have pretty much moved south for the past couple of years and now are rebuilding in PA. Recognizing, obviously, politics is always different state by state, and some states are smaller, larger, and have different systems of municipal government too. But what are some of the lessons learned or some of the positive attributes you've seen in other states that not only encourage you to move operations down there, but you've seen as being ongoingly successful, that maybe we could apply back here to Pennsylvania to change sort of the ongoing tenor on investing in infrastructure?
Well, the good thing was that Maryland and Virginia also got substantial funding increases at the state level. So their markets are advancing. There's good growth down there. I think in Virginia in particular, they're doing a lot more design build, and they're doing a little different type of design build than where there's more discretion in the design. Putting in flexibility there, I think you can really get a lot of innovation, make the dollars go further. Maryland's doing some more design build too, and I think it also helps to get the projects out faster. So there's been quite a trend towards that in the other states. I think that's going to help them a lot, make them a lot more efficient. If they can do it right. There's an art to doing that. Also, now the feds are pushing these ATCs, and I was just at a conference where they're pushing they're called alternative technical concepts, where you can go in prior to the letting of the project and make proposed, like value engineering, changes that you see that could save money. And, in the past, what we've done is, think, well, if we bid this job, if we can do it differently, we could save a ton of money. And we would do it as a value engineering, and if it gets approved, you share 50% with the state, which is fine. That's a fair way of doing it. But very often the value engineering, most of the time, if you're going to save money, particularly on a bridge, it's either in the foundation or the superstructure. And the foundation, there's often not enough time to process a value engineering. So if you have these ATCs, and the feds are now pushing to do these on traditional design bid build projects. And if you would have that flexibility, that you have a great concept and you might spend some money developing that concept, you take it into the state before the job is let, have them evaluate it and tell you whether you can include that in your bid or not. Then if they say you can, and the other part of it, is that they would keep that confidential, because it's your idea and you probably spent some money getting it developed. And then when you bid the job, you can use that, and that would give you a competitive advantage. Now, everybody, has the same opportunity if they can think of a better way of doing it. So it's another innovative contracting method. There's a lot of innovative contracting methods out there now that are being tested in the other states. And, I encourage the department to pursue them.
Well, I got to say, Rich, the alternative technical concepts requires some legislation here in Pennsylvania, which we proposed, which was fought by the APC.
It was.
It was.
That
We
was
were strongly in
unbelievable.
favor of that. We were strongly in favor of alternative technical concepts and wanted to be part of Act 89. And
You're on the right track. I'll see
so
what influence I can
that's an
exert.
interesting, you might want to talk to your board about that because
Yeah,
they
no, definitely.
they fought that. We are using it with our P3 method of delivery because we're able to without legislation. And frankly, we agree with what you're saying about more flexibility. It hasn't been embraced at large by the construction community. The fear, it has, and I think the fear is, to be fair, is that for the smaller contractors that do individual projects, is they may not be as competitive, and that if the larger firms that can afford to invest can come in and come up with the alternative technical concepts, and we approve them, that it may limit the competition. And that's why I think the board's had a difficult time supporting this. But I agree with you, and I think we've been pushing a lot more design-build work out. We're going to use the P3 on these bridges, and my comments on the P3 is that I think it's a little bit like when the United States went to the moon, is that one thing to get to the moon, but you learn a lot about different methods and means to get there. And I think a lot of what we're going to see in technologies and approaches under the P3 program will be things that we will be able to use in our traditional, whether it's design bid build or design build program, because of the innovation that we're affording contractors and those entities, and I'm sure you're doing it with your partners, as are the others, is being as innovative as possible for delivery, and that's what we're after. So, I agree, and I think, but the alternative technical concepts does require enabling legislation, and we're not able to do it without that. And
Was there a cap on what projects you could use the ATCs?
we can't do it, period.
No, but I mean, in the
unless we do it
proposed
under the P3.
legislation didn't have a cap.
I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at that. But I think it's something we ought to work on with the APC, because without it, we can't offer you that. It's illegal for us to offer you that. And that's why we wanted the enabling legislation as part of this. And again, the reason we're using it in the P3 is because we can do it through the P3 law.
Right.
We can't do it in our traditional design bid build or design build process. But like you, I think what it does is allows, like the design build does, it allows the engineering contractor to look at the way you would build it with your equipment, which would be different than you would do it with your equipment, but you optimize it for you rather than us having to put a design out that any of you could build. And that's where the cost savings comes in. While I'm on the P3, I wanted to say, when Rich talked about the CNG, we're going to go out with we're exploring right now under our P3 program another, obviously we've got this Marcellus Shale resource, and as Rich said, long-term conversion of the fleet, the transit fleet, can save long-term operating dollars. But I don't think you or any other transit operator really wants to take care of a CNG filling station. But there are entities out there that know how to do this. So we're looking at a statewide P3 contract for a private entity to come in and basically not take care of the maintenance of their facility, but to basically take care of the supply and refueling of and maintenance of that refueling station. And then the requirement will be on the other side of the fence is a public station. Because, you often hear about what can government do to help push the CNG market for the fleet. And it's not conversion of our fleet because of the type of fleet we have, but for a transit fleet, return to base, dedicated use, absolutely makes a lot of sense. So we're looking at a P3, a solicited P3, where we're going to have an entity come in and basically take over all of these fueling stations at the transit facilities with that requirement to put an across the fence, which will help, we think, spur the use of CNG in the public fleet. And we've worked with a lot of the, I'll say, the delivery trucks. I don't want to be general, but like a potato chip type delivery truck, the UPS trucks, the trucks you see. That, those here. Yeah, we do have a few of those. But those are the type of fleet that makes sense economically to convert. So if we can couple what Rich wants to do and should be doing here in New York with a public station on the other side of the fence, it helps support what might happen in the private sector. That's another use of our P3 tool that we're doing here under the department going forward.
There's an interest in where we're building with local industry to do exactly, we have Frito-Lay there, and there's others that are, so they're interested in working with us as we move forward with this, so.
And we're also looking at working out, an agreement for, like, when he builds his OSHA compliant facility for us, if we do have some of our fleet, which might, very little of the fleet we could actually convert, but that we could in terms of light duty, that we'd be able to come over and work on them at your location with our mechanics and our labor to not get into a union issue, but to have an OSHA compliant site where if we do have the opportunity to move some of Mike's fleet into CNG, we do it knowing we have an OSHA compliant site. There's not a lot of our fleet we can do that with, especially not until the new Volvo engine comes out and we see what the horsepower capability is on the bigger trucks. But in the interim, we think some of our light duty trucks could convert. And as you build these new maintenance facilities, it gives us a location to co-locate when it comes to maintenance.
We have a bay for you. We have a work bay for you. We're ready.
So I think we'd turn it over to Mike to go over maybe some specific projects that are coming up in York County that I think many York Counties are very excited about, and their time frame and what we can expect in traffic delays.
Okay, well, I'll probably take, some of Barry's comments about the statewide and Act 89 and try to drill that down into what it means for York County here. And of course, it is very good news. I want to start off by saying this is like coming home to a degree, because we have our tech and coordinating meetings we held here for a number of years. We're now over at the 911 center, so we spent some time in this room before. But I want to thank the MPO and our planning partners, because this tip update, every tip update has its challenges. This one, we moved the ball around quite a lot with the financial guidance, because we just weren't sure where we were going to be. And the good news is once we landed with approved Act 89, we had a lot more dollars to look at with the tip update, but we had a very short time to pull together our tips, and every MPO in District 8 worked very well with us, and I just wanted to pass on my appreciation for that. 2014, as Barry said, you look at the 1.5 billion statewide and go on to 2.3. We added $27 million worth of work in York County that will be bid in 2014. Some of those jobs will be bid and completed. The I-83 work up at Newberrytown, that job will be completed before we move into winter. That fits into that category Barry talked about, coming out of the bad winter that we had last year. We added another project starting at the Maryland line. Again, this was a little later in the season than we normally bid a project like that, but we put a requirement in there for the contractor to at least get northbound done in that area. We're going to...
Driving across the state line, I'll say we have a better road.
Since that's my district, I appreciate it.
I called the Maryland secretary. I said, "It's your turn. I've had enough."
Of course, we're going to continue with bridges and roadways. Asset management is going to be very, very important. I don't have the actual figure in front of me, but again, I believe when we look at the financial guidance for the York MPO in year 5, it essentially doubles the program. And then we also look at, in York, you also have I-83, of course, so we have some MPO funds from the Interstate Management Program to add to York County as well. The next 3 years, we have 53 projects right now programmed to go to construction for $158 million. You wanted a big project, we're going to advertise one and open up bids on Exit 18. I believe that's January of 2015. We got an estimate of about $60 million on that project. So of that 158, that's a big chunk of it. Again, bridge rehabilitations, resurfacings. We're going to start looking at some congestive management and safety related projects. We have, in addition to Exit 18, we also have some work down at Exit 4 that we looked at, again, to support some of the jobs that are moving into the area. It's a project that's going to have a value, with about a $5 million investment It may not be the project that we need 20 years from now, but it's something we can do. And, you know, Ron, you and I had a discussion on, boy, let's not build something and then tear it out in a few years, and that clearly won't be the case here with the work down at Exit 4. You know, just north of York County, but all important for the folks that travel here in central PA, we're going to wrap up a project at the I-83-581 interchange. Probably by the end of this construction season, we expect to have traffic in the final configuration. That's kind of code for me telling you we'll be back next spring, and we'll probably be putting on the top surface for the paving. And we also have, speaking of innovation, we also have the bridge deck over top of superstructure over top of 10th Street, which we're going to do that in about 3 different weekends with prefabricated sections, where we actually have to take a direction of 581. We have to close it. So obviously, when you do that, we got to be in there and be out. So that's you know, every day counts kind of an initiative and something that we added to that project.
You know, just to let you know, the I-83-581, even though we get a lot of press about how many people commute in Maryland and live in York County, we actually have more people commuting to the Harrisburg area. So even though the 83-581 isn't technically in York County, it's still vitally important, and we appreciate that project moving along.
Right, and we you know, it really sets the stage for what we're going to be able to do now with Act 89 and continuing with I-83, not only around the Capitol Beltway in Harrisburg, but also I-83 here in York County. We already have a study underway to look at, you know, north of Exit 18. We had that originally up to George Street, and I think through the discussions and conversations, things you looked at, you know, boy, I hate to say it, probably 10 years ago already when we did the interchange study or more. You know, when you get up at 921, you had things like that with the financial resources we had in place at the time, it just wasn't a worthy project to pursue. So we added another project which takes it from Exit 24 up to 28 to really look at how do we manage those moves in that area. We didn't come up with anything specific, but we need to look at it, and we should be looking at it. So they're the jobs that are going to be in the design and you know, moving forward. And you know, if you start looking at reconstructing I-83 here in York County, there's going to be some big dollars required, you know, in the out years to support that. Seth, I'll come back and say, you know, we talked about adaptive signal systems, and we do have 2 projects here in York County, one on the 74 corridor and one on the Route 30 corridor that, again, without Act 89, it would have been difficult to find the funding to do that. But here again, I have to go back and give the MPO here and the county planning some credit. They've talked about this for a number of years to recognize the effect of going across the municipal boundary. You know, one of my favorite corridors just happens to be 124. Probably no surprise. But, you know, in 2 miles, you go through 3 municipalities. So, you know, someone has to step back and manage the traffic along the corridor and just not, you know, forget about it once it goes into the next municipality. And to a degree, these adaptive signal systems, they do have a little bit of a design build element to those, because, you know, every system out there today is a little bit different. A lot of these projects do start off with a little bit of research, you know, looking at the equipment, seeing what's best. Some of these, you know, maybe it's just some retiming efforts, and we can really increase the capacity along the corridors. So that's all good news. And then I'll go back, the liquid fuels, I'm pretty close to this number. I think the additional funding for York County across all municipalities this year was around $860,000. And keep in mind, that's about a 7.5% to 8% increase over the year before. But in year 5, it's going to be a 60% increase over what they got last year. So again, you know, we see the needs out there on the local roads as well. When we do have a project that by policy, there's a cost there that the municipality really should burden, It was tough to do that in the past because they just didn't have the resources. So you step back and you try to figure out a better way to do it. And then I'll tie that also to the efficiencies at PennDOT. We're challenged, and we've been doing this for a number of years. We got to continue to do it. But how do we approach, for example, one of the more important things that we do is winter services here in PA. We do a lot of municipal agreements. At least we try to encourage locals to help plow our roadways. Now, during the winter, of course, that's a cost, whether it's on our side of the table or on their side of the table. But if you can increase the amount of municipal agreements that we have, that'll lead to less vehicles for us throughout the year. And, if you look at a brand new truck, $180,000, about $15,000 a year. And in addition to that, because of where we're at with our staff here in maintenance, we go through a process of hiring temporary operators to help out in the winter. We have no choice. If we want to be out there 24/7, which I'm sure there won't be one person here in the county that calls and says, yeah, Mike, you can take 4 hours off in the middle of the night. You don't need to worry about it. But to man each snow route 24/7, that's the model we have. Well, if 4 or 5 years down the line, our liquid fuels for a payout is 60% higher than it was last year, it's going to open up some more of those opportunities to share resources. And we're looking forward to that as well. And then in addition, the multimodal funding. Again, over my career, you can see the answer on the other side of the fence, and there just wasn't a way for us to help the municipality, and we can coordinate that as well. And of course, as Barry said, $20 million worth of funding in the first year, and $200 million worth of applications. So it's certainly needed out there. That is just a little highlight for York County. I do have a packet here that kind of summarizes the individual projects. There's a spreadsheet that I'm sure our folks at the MPO probably recognize. And just in case you need it, I also have a couple copies of the 2015 tip. And most of this stuff, by the way, is available to the public, but for ease, I just brought along, and if anyone has any questions at all, feel free to contact me anytime. And thanks for having us here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Before we close out with closing comments, throw it over to Bob Riley from Congressman Perry's office. Obviously, there was some discussion on what's happening at the federal level, and I know the congressman's on the Transportation Committee. Not sure the exact title down in D.C. of it. Appreciate his leadership and his fortitude, and just open it up to you for any comments on federal transportation funding.
No, thanks, Seth. Absolutely, and Rich Wagman's comments are well taken. I mean, it is impossible for folks in this room to purchase equipment or hire people based on month-by-month planning, and that's something that Congressman Perry and many of his colleagues are cognizant of. We're lucky here in Pennsylvania that several of our members of the delegation are on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Congressman Perry being one of them. The chairman of the committee is Bill Schuster of Pennsylvania, so a lot of the reforms that Secretary Shoak led and that are being used as a trademark for other states are being watched at the federal level. And I can tell you that some of the things that we're working on behind the scenes mirror some of the things that happened here in Pennsylvania. Where we are right now is funding has been pushed off until the end of May, so the current funding levels are set till then. But then it's game time. We have to come up with and face the same kind of difficult decisions that you faced here in Pennsylvania. How do you pay for the reforms? What makes it more difficult is, obviously when you have more than 500 different members representing places as diverse as California to Utah to Minnesota to Pennsylvania to Florida, the challenge gets big. But I think the one thing you should take I'll give you a positive and I'll give you maybe a cautionary note. On a positive end, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee has been and continues to be one of the more bipartisan committees in Congress. So you hear about a lot of the partisanship happening in Washington. That committee is not known for it. In fact, last year, Congressman Schuster led an effort on water transportation with our ports and our waterways, which are a major economic impact to the nation. And a lot of the same reforms we talked about, streamlining project delivery, consolidating programs, finding efficiencies, we were able to do, and that bill passed the committee by a bipartisan basis, passed the Congress in a bipartisan basis. And you're seeing that with the larger transportation bill. We are talking about many public-private partnerships. Congressman Perry's a member of a special committee that just this week released their findings on the need for public-private partnerships at the federal level. So we're moving there. So I think the good news is that everyone is aware that this is a major issue and that it needs to be addressed, but the challenges that we faced in Pennsylvania are the exact same we face at the federal level, and that's how do you pay for it. And in years past, how these things were made easier were by earmarks. The general public doesn't really recognize this, but we don't do earmarks anymore at the federal level. So in years past, it was easier for member X to vote for a large transportation bill because they could direct funding to their specific congressional districts for needs that they thought were critical. You can't do that any longer, and that makes it difficult. Also, some of the ideas that are talked about as reform ideas are difficult to do at the federal level. We all know the gas tax is a dying source of revenue for transportation. We're not going to be able to use it much longer. One of the ideas that have been kicked around for years at the federal level is the vehicle miles traveled tax, the idea of taxing based on the number of miles you drive rather than the gas you use. After what's happened in the last several years with cybersecurity and with the problems we found at the NSA, that makes that issue a lot more difficult. So what I would tell you is it's definitely a priority. Everyone knows it needs to happen, and the hope is that we will get it done next year. We won't have to do another temporary extension, but finding that mechanism to pay for it will be the key to it. And in Washington right now, when you're $17 trillion in debt, there's a very large voice of people that say the federal government shouldn't be in the transportation business hardly at all. We should pass the money back to the states. So we have a lot of different kind of debates that you didn't have here at the state level, but I can guarantee you that, at least in the Pennsylvania delegation, we're committed to trying to get something done.
I appreciate that. Any closing comments, Kevin, Ron? No? All right. So we are going to hop on a bus, take a tour, but I appreciate everybody coming out. Secretary, thank you for your leadership. Please pass on our thanks to the governor, too, for his leadership, highlighting this and getting across the goal line. Greatly appreciate it. And the leaders here who brought this to fruition as well. Without your data, your support, your constant push, it would not have happened either. So a huge thank you to everybody who was part of that. So thank you. Secretary, any closing remarks?
No, I just again want to thank the delegation here for your support in this. It's been great working with you on it, and I think we're all looking forward to seeing the results. And interestingly enough, you heard from your employers down here, and what did they talk about? Adding people. We all represent, for me with the governor, as Secretary Zogby was here, general fund relies, 2/3 of it is on personal income tax and sales tax. How do you grow the general fund, grow jobs? Everyone knows that. This is beyond all the other benefits. This is a jobs bill. And one that is going to create employment right here in the Commonwealth. These guys employ people here. They're talking about hiring people here. Don't hire any of my staff, please. I need good people too. This will have an effect, a beneficial effect on the general fund, both in the initial jobs that are created by the folks you hear from today, but also by the fact that employers who look at locating here now know we've got a competent infrastructure to serve them, and that's also going to help us on the general fund side. So again, thank you.
Let's go for a bus ride.